Continuing part 4. We are still in chapter 4. What truths they have are arranged like the plants in the most artificial Dutch gardens, while the garden of God is a jungle of natural beauties and sweetnesses. On this question of the Visio Dei, seeing God, read what is said by Tertullian, Chrysostom, Augustine, Anthemius, Theodoret, Forestius, Voetius, and a score of others, ancient and modern, that lie on the table beside the present writer. And at the close, you will feel as if you must rise and shake the skirts of the garments of your soul and plunge into some deep forest, or climb some lofty peak, or go so far out on lake or sea that the sounds of men do not reach you, and look up into the great sky and down into the greater depths of your spirit, and open the windows of your soul that the air of the breath of God and the light of the smile of God may enter. And when we say breath and smile, let's not anthropomorphize too much. The world by wisdom knew not God. 1 Corinthians 1:21 is a general truth. The original preposition used was dia. It contains a figure of speech which, being incorporated, the words might be translated: the world does not find God at the other end of wisdom, by which is meant shrewdness, skill in matters of common life, and even ability in the department of dialectics. Purity of character is needed, totally cleanness of the soul, and such as have this have the blessed vision of God. One such man who never befools himself with the adoption of an error because it is pleasant, and never takes his opinions at second hand, believing them because they are taught by one who has a great name, a man whose lusts and passions are not allowed to make such a fume about his soul that the very sun of truth is hidden, a man whose moral atmosphere is translucent, sees God, knows God, and shall see and know him forever. The glass to be used in the telescope, lifted to gaze into the greatest depths which vision can penetrate, must be flawless and colorless, otherwise all observations will be inaccurate, and all calculations thereupon be false and misleading. The lesson of the teacher is against double-mindedness, guile, and all kinds of mental as well as moral impurities, as interfering with the highest privileges and pleasures of the soul. And of course, spiritual pleasure or directly spiritual experience, not just, in a spiritual context, is quite a bit different from the mental or physical. But really, you get those in line as much as you can in your circumstance, and then it opens you up to the other more. And then follows the last of the characteristics of the happy. Happy are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. See, called sons of God. It's a phrase, right? That has another sense. It would seem most natural that if any body of men can be found who are distinguished by the predominance of the characteristics we have been studying, and we have been who shall be engaged in the blessed work of pacification, and shall be making peace among men skillfully and on a proper basis, as distinguished from those who increase difficulties by their bungling interference and thereby compromising the right in making settlements, touched by a sense of their own spiritual wants, mourning over their own frailties of temper and character, meek, merciful, and guileless, seeing things in clear light, humane, but hating all wrongs. They will be the very people who shall bring together those who have been separated. See, you do have to hate in the spiritual life, but what you hate is the wrong. And I don't just mean, some mundane mistake of this line's a little here over there, and perhaps, you do want to do well physically, but, the immoral and the ignorant and that sort of stuff, and even amorality, it's, because amorality is a waste, right? There's nothing to it, right? And here is the final blow to the secularity of their messianic hopes. Well, that's too simplistic, but you know what I mean. The things without consciousness kind of waste, so you make your intentions and stuff like this, and it gets turned to some type of morality, right? They had dreamed of going forth, conquering, and to conquer. How happy should they be pouring out of all the gates of Jerusalem and from all the hamlets of Judea, following their divine leader to Rome, hurling Caesar from his throne, gathering all the crowns and scepters of the world into their arms, and trampling the heathen and the Gentile. See, what do they mean by heathen and Gentile? And if it's just, and how do you distinguish, if they're using it as some sort of slur for, well, you're not one of us, so you're heathen or Gentile. It's like the Romans called people stuff like pagan and heathen, not because of a religious difference. It was the difference between the city dwellers and villa dwellers and stone, well-formed buildings, and those who dwelt in the pegs and the heaths, right? And Gentile, of course, those who turn their back on God. But of course, if they're going to turn back to God, they have to turn back to God. And just being of a tribe or not is not going to do that. But trampling them under their feet, well, again, it's better to, it's in the long run more effective to try to have an influence. There's no such happiness in store for them. The climax of the description which Jesus gives of his followers, of the people he desires to collect about him, is that they are to be peacemakers. That's why you start with the green flag. You want that wholeness. See, it's not just peace. It's, it's wholeness and stuff. Exerting the gentle but powerful influence of benign lives on the turbulent passions of men, and preventing and curing the dissensions of the world. Such men are the sons of God. Remember how I pointed out, Banya is intelligences of God. Barya is productive ones of God. There are further meanings, but And Jesus teaches that the relationship and likeness to the Most High God shall be recognized. They shall be considered sons of God, not little children, but adult sons. And of course, we're gender neutral here, and actually probably the original. So all this men and sons and all this stuff we're talking about, the women too. So it's children of. but adult sons of the King of Peace. Every man of the disciples of Jesus will, as the ground of his kinship to the Holy Father, as I pointed out, the whole Father thing too, God is the pole, God is the provider, it's not so literal. Do whatever in him lies to bring an end to all violences among men. So that while that great diversity of intellectual differences shall continue, which God intends shall be in men forever, their passions may not be kindled thereby into outbreaks that destroy society. Well, a lot of sectarianism has done a lot of that, and secularism has done even worse with that, because the problems that arose in that sort of stuff are just magnified with people don't have the, oh, well, at least we're serving the same God, or at least we have the same, no, you're the different party. It's all about nation and political party and all that nonsense. But let us also remember, it's like Emmanuel, Omnual. Well, that term, if you refer that or Messiah or Christ, much each, or, Shao Shunt, or any of those terms, then you refute Christianity. Because you're saying, well, okay, if we take these terms literally, he can't be a deity. He's like a secondary figure sanctioned by deity, in their role, deputized like every other prophet, Khalifa, whatever. I mean the Islamic Khalifa, not just, ruler of the Muslimin, but, which is actually a lot rarer than, the just, the use of, oh, there's a bunch of Muslims around, we're going to call it the Khalifa, but it's like, that's not entirely what it is, right? But yeah, it would be the al or ya. First of all, would be moved towards the front of the word. The prefix would be started, so it's like the divine son, or, there'd be some sort of term to indicate that rather than, the existence of wars shows how far men are yet from coming wholly under the dominion of the principles of Jesus. But let no man be discouraged. Well, the destroying non-Christian media is, it's in the book of Acts, chapter 19. So and there's other indications, so that's mostly Paul. But those who do not make me Lord, bring them here and kill them. Well, the Muslimin take Jesus as a spiritual master. So Curie, renders as that. But still, no, somebody doesn't accept some variety of mastership of Jesus, then, you don't do that just because people don't accept your faith or some aspect of your faith. That's just, but the war and stuff like that, yeah. Biblically, we can refute this idea that Jesus was this pacifist, But let no man be discouraged. Earth distributes its prizes, and heaven bestows its honors. In the estimate of God, a man who is engaged in breaking the peace of the universal commonwealth is despicable, and the peacemakers are the highest style of men. The warriors wrap themselves in bloody garments to lie down amidst the insane plaudits of a vulgar generation in everlasting forgetfulness, while simple-hearted pacificators go up to the high places in the loftiest society of the universe. Happy are they who have been persecuted on account of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens, or domain of the universe. Well, that term righteousness, we maybe need to go and to a bit more detail, because it's not the same thing as being churchy or something like that. Having made this ideal representation of the discipleship of that messiahship, which he chose to represent, Jesus glanced at the sufferers in the past. They had been very much such persons as he had described, and they seemed to have perished out of the world miserably. They might have been cited as a refutation of his statements, for their sighs and groans were a strange echo to his repeated, "Happy, happy, happy." But they are happy. Happy they that have been persecuted on account of righteousness. Hereafter at the very least, or honestly, sometimes those people are doing better than those persecutors. You can see in those who persecute and aggress and stuff sometimes this crawling out of their own skin reaction to what they've done, what they have become. Persecution is represented in the original text by a word taken from the chase, and for more, the stronger frightening, pursuing, and causing to run those who are the weaker. The good are not always in power. When the evil have rule, the good are made to suffer. But if a man has come into that affliction because when the question of right and wrong was thrust upon him, he stood up for the right, he is not to be compassionated. The tyrant is to be pitied, not the victim. Brief pain and everlasting glory is the martyr's reward. If he was a martyr because he preferred dying to sinning, brief triumph and everlasting shame belonged to him who was the malignant destroyer. Generations of even bad men who succeeded a tyrant condemn him while they praise his victim. It is character, not circumstance, that makes the happiness. There is no praise to pain. A man is not happy because he has suffered, but because he has suffered for the sake of being right. It is the case and not the pain that makes a martyr. And now, when Jesus looked upon the noble army of martyrs who had chosen to keep an unbroken manhood in suffering rather than purchase pleasure by surrender of their souls, he exclaimed, "Happy those who have suffered on account of righteousness." Well, gone through difficulty is probably the right term. I'm releasing things on Buddhism right now, and there's a difference between discontent or suffering and difficulty, right? The kingdom of the heavens is theirs. They stood a while in the narrow place of torture, dungeon, or rack. They are now free in all the width of the dominion of the universe. If they had surrendered the right to avoid the painful, they would have so belittled their spirits as to have been miserable. But now they possess whatever delights the universe can pour in on souls that are truly great. Now, one of the things is that the cause, feasible. See, that's the thing. First of all, you hear the term jihad. So, you're struggling, striving. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes, you're like struggling, striving, feasible in a cause, in a way. You're not just in the name of or something like that. You're straight up in the cause. And Allah, of course, the singular and definitive term for God, because it's not like all these people were killed. They were, so they must be martyrs. Not necessarily, because it definitely involves the case, what was the intention of those doing it? What was the intention or consciousness of those who were otherwise, involved? It was natural that Jesus should then turn with a special tenderness towards those who were linking their fortunes with his. They weren't making him wealthy, but, and who by becoming his disciples were to try the experiment of being such persons as he has described. Happy ye when they shall revile you and persecute you, and say every bad thing against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and shout, for your reward is great in the heavens. And thus they persecuted the prophets who were before you. If they became poor in spirit, and meek and merciful and pure-hearted and peacemakers, the world would hate and persecute them. That trouble would come on account of Jesus because they were followers of him. In the collusions of life, men will be reviled and persecuted. There is nothing in that to make joy. On the contrary, if any trouble has arisen from a man's own imprudence, it is a cause of great regret and pain. But when every kind of bad thing has been spoken of falsely of a man, and the utterance of it has been prompted by the bad, that is, in those who malign, excited by hatred of his goodness, let him rejoice, yea, let him even exult. It is proof of the positiveness and vigor of his character and goodness. Every man that has flung himself on his generation to do them good has had this kind of trouble. Evil is positive. Well, there's positive and negative evils, right? And a slightly different way of thinking about it. There's commission and omission sorts of evils. Good must be positive. They will collide. So much the worse for the evil. Why can't we learn that? A man slanders another, circulates lies that are injurious, and the misrepresented party is regarded as the damaged. Is he? Is he not the slanderer who is hurt? Well, yeah, people are hurt, their feelings are hurt, and their response to others can be hurt. But then again, there's merit of having patiently, in one way or another, gone through what one's gone through, and the difficulties that can atone for things. At the close of the day, who ought to shout in his closet? The slanderer, who has succeeded in making his lies temporarily believed, and thus done vast injury to his own character, or the meek man who has not allowed the falsehood of his persecutor to damage his character by arousing unholy resentments. The heavens are very wide, there is room in the universe. The growth of character will be the good man's everlasting joy. The prophets were not destroyed, but what of their persecutors? Did you ever hear of Magor, Missabib? No. He was the same as Pashur. And who was Pashur? The innocent ignorance implied in that question tells the whole story of the relation of persecutors and the persecuted. Pashur, named Magor, Missabib, was a great man in his day. He was the son of Immer, the priest, who was the chief governor in the house of Jehovah. There was an earnest, brave man in his day named Jeremiah, and this man spoke words of great truth very courageously, but were bitter words to an evil people and priesthood. And so Pashur threshed him and put him into the stocks in a most public place near the temple, and carried him. And left him there all night, Jeremiah 20. But Pashur was carried to Babylon a slave and died obscurely there. There would be no memory of his name on earth at this day, for the fact that Jeremiah has pilloried him in a book which the world will never let die, hundreds of thousands of which are printed every year, although 24 centuries have elapsed and Jeremiah is among the immortals. Make that 25 now, or 26, depending on what you're rounding to. And there was a lot of prophets and stuff that just were lost to history. There's, among the side writings of the Bible, there are more prophets by name that the Israelites claim, but they just weren't included in the composition of Judaism. Even, one-liners like this, per se. Of all the kings of David's family who sat on David's throne, there was no one who reigned so long as Manasseh, the king of Judah, and yet of no one is so little known. The historians avoid as much as may be all mention of his reign. If the traditions of his people are to be relied on, he caused Isaiah to be sawn asunder. No words of the king are remembered. No actions of his are regarded as memorial and exemplary. But Isaiah's words have inspired the preachers and prophets of all succeeding times, and today are preserved among the most precious treasures of all human literature. And so it has been, is, and will be until right and wrong shall cease to oppose each other. Great is their reward in all the heavens who suffer being in the right. The value of lofty character. What Jesus says of the position of his disciples, those who are distinguished by the characteristics he has mentioned, is so plain as to need little exposition. He braces them against the storm which is to beat upon them, by reminding them of the transcendent importance and dignity of the functions which they are to discharge towards the world. They are the world's conservators and illuminators. So, Luciferian, it's salt and it's light. Without them, the world would rot in utter darkness. This is to be true in all ages. Take instantly out of the world all men described in the opening of the Sermon of the Mount, and the evil that is in it would run the world rapidly to a state of total putrefaction. Take them away, and all hope would be gone, all brightness, bloom, and beauty. Ye are the salt of the earth. Remember the whole alchemical salt, sulfur, mercury. Not necessarily in that order. But if the salt becomes insipid, with what shall it be seasoned? For nothing is it useful any longer except to be cast out and trodden down by men. Ye are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid, neither do they light a lamp and put it under a corn measure. Any type of grain applies to that, right? But upon a lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. Thus, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works, and thus have more glorious thoughts of your Father who is in the heavens. And see, well, the first thing is you realize that deity is beyond, this world. And then you can realize deity as sort of in charge or playing a role in this world, even to the point of your, being in your own heart. But then you realize that deity is still, beyond. You're holding to that realization. God is in me and I am in God, but God's the innermost, the biggest and the smallest and everything in between, but he's not these, it's not the creation, right? More than among the moderns, salt was held in very high admiration among the ancients. Their poets gave it the most noble and beautiful epithets, and their philosophers bestowed great praise upon it. It was used in religious services, symbolical of what is very fine, very refining, very powerful, and very preservative. Homer calls salt Thion, divine, and Plato Theophiles, soma, a substance dear to divinity. There was a Latin proverb, purio celilo, purer than salt. Both Greeks and Latins used it as a trope for wit, on account of its pungency. Hence we hear of Attic salt. In incense and in religious sacrifices, salt was used. See Ovid, Fausti 1, 337. The words of Jesus, in which he likens his disciples at once to salt and light, are remarkably reproduced by Pliny, History, Natural History. I don't remember the 31:9. In his words, nil sol et sel utilius, nothing is more useful than sun and salt. And because of their value to the world, Jesus urges them to be careful to preserve the saltness and to avoid what would cover the light. In other words, preserve in their characters those very elements which give them these powers. Much useless labor has been spent on the salt and city questions. Whether real salt can lose its saltness is not a pertinent question. The question of Jesus is hypothetical. If the saline quality be lost out of salt, how can it be restored? By chemical action, we know that salt can lose its savor. Well, because it's dirty, but the salt itself. Because the example should have suggested something that was familiar, and it is not a familiar fact that salt does utterly lose its saltness. Many have perplexed themselves with striving to find what the to alas is, if it be not salt. A Dutch writer, Van der Hart, suggested that it was asphaltus from the Dead Sea, and that the trodden down of men has given the commentators great perplexity. A German author brings forward authorities from the rabbins to prove that salt, which by exposure has so far lost its chlorine that it could not preserve, was sometimes scattered upon slippery places to prevent falling, as by the priest in the temple when sacrificing animals. Now, if you use salt to absorb blood out of meat, then, that pile of salt has lost its savor, right? But his citations feebly sustain his position, and if they did, they would not disprove the words of Jesus, who says that it is worthless, and this being trodden down of men expresses only the utter contempt men have for its worthlessness. So of the city there is no reason to suppose that some special city was referred to. Any city on a hilltop must be conspicuous, especially when lighted at night. He was simply charging his disciples not to hide their light, nor to lose the vigor of a good character. And also, honestly, if you set your, you light a light under, a bushel of whatever, or a bunch of dried, whatever, you end up starting a fire. So, if you hold back when you should be expressing, let your light shine. If you have light, it will do its own shining and give light to others if you do not cover it. Lucifer is a term that means light bringer. Lux et feros. So see, rather than being a Christ bearer, you're supposed to be a light bearer. Only let it shine. You need not go flaunting it about as a wild boy does a flambeau at night, but let it be like the sun's light, naturally illuminating. But do not obscure it. There are just two important things to care for, namely that a man have in him the illuminating property, and that he see to it that light be not obscured. The law and Jesus, the completer thereof. Well, think not that I came to relax the law or the prophets. I came not to relax, but to complete. Well, plarose, he's going to refurbish it. And by refurbishing it, he's not. For verily I say unto you, until the heaven and the earth pass away, neither the smallest letter nor the smallest stroke of a letter shall pass from the law until all be accomplished. So see, this world remains, the microcosm and the macrocosm remain. Whosoever, therefore, shall relax one of the least of these commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called least in the kingdom of heavens, the dominion of the universe. But whosoever shall do and teach, he shall be called great in the kingdom of the heavens. Remember that thing in Matthew 7:21 to 23. You have to do the will of the one who sent Jesus. Rasulullah is the Arabic term for a character like Jesus. So you're doing the will of God. You actually have to follow the commandments. You just don't do things in Jesus' name. Or you don't do things in Jesus' name at all, according to that passage. But whenever any man has the fortune to see truth in a new light, and the commission to make it known to the world, there are those who adroitly endeavor to break his power by giving out that he is a revolutionist, and he is unstable, and that he is discontented with the established order of things. Yeah, admit that there's flaws in the order of things. It doesn't mean you're a terrorist or something. Such a rumor does two wrongs. It drives from him those who hold to the truth that has been already gained, and sends about the new teacher those who really hope that the allegation is true, and that old things are to be abrogated. Well, certain things about the material culture of the past, perhaps, but the old things is in the conservative and the liberal ways. Their approach to the teacher confirms the prejudicial rumor, and so soon as they discover their mistake, they fall away, and this flux and reflux of apparent popularity weakens the hold of the teacher on the public confidence. Jesus suffered in that way, as in modern times have Luther and Wesley, who sustained towards the Roman and Anglican churches, respectfully, a position similar to that of Jesus towards the Jewish church. well, it wasn't a church, it was a spiritual oratory, but that's, ecclesia, you can say, but not church. In this discourse of his doctrine, Jesus is at the pains